On tonight's No Disco, we pay very special homage to one of the great groundbreaking and rule-breaking bands of Irish musical history, Planxty.
There were three drunken men came from the Isle of Whites.
Yeah, they could really rock out with four acoustic instruments on something like the 42-pound check, you know, which I still kind of play quite regularly in DJ sets. And
yeah, I know of one song, I'm not going to say which one I deliberately robbed from, but there's a tune on the first album that's certainly inspired by the song.
Yeah.
Shit, they're going to come running after me now.
And I will be your equal before the evening's out. The three drunken men, they push the jug about.
The great Irish trad and classical arranger and composer Sean O'Riordan changed the face of Irish music in the late 50s by developing a new group dynamic with his ensemble of virtuoso traditional musicians, ceoil Cúlan. Their work would go on to inspire future generations of such bands. One of those bands was Planxty. Starting with the four original members of Andy Irvine, Liam O'Flynn, Donal Lunny and Christy Moore, Planxty began a musical journey in the early 70s, creating a unity of ballad singing, folk guitar styles, Eastern European music and American roots with traditional Irish music. It was here in Dowling's pub in Prosperous where a young Christy Moore and a young Donal Lunny attended their first trad sessions. In fact, it was in this very room where they saw Liam O'Flynn play pipes for the first time. Pat Dowling, the landlord, was a hugely respected man. He kept all the instruments on standby: baron, flute, banjo, fiddle, accordion, in case a musician popped in and felt like joining in on the session.
Well, I suppose with Liam, I was very fortunate, and the first piper I ever heard was Liam O'Flynn. He was from about 8 miles away, and I used to hear him playing in Prosperous. And I was just blown away by what I heard, by the sound of the instrument, when I didn't realise when I heard him that he was such a wonderful player. It was only as time went on I came to realise that he was a maestro, you know. Donal, we just more or less grew up together. We grew into music together. With Andy Irvine, I'd known his work before, during and after Sweeney's Men, and that coupled with the magic of Sweeney's Men, I loved what they did. Sweeney's Men awakened something in me. I heard it over in England and I was just blown away by the sound.
Oh, he was big. He was huge on the English folk scene at that time, yeah. Yeah. I mean, I think just after that he'd said, would you do a gig for me in somewhere in the southwest of England, because I'm double booked. And he said, it's £15. I thought, oh, that was a few pounds more than I was getting. And I got there and the guy said, ladies and gentlemen, he said, I'm terribly sorry Christy Moore can't appear tonight, but he sent along, I can't remember his name, but here he is.
In the early 60s, O'Donoghue's pub here on Bagot Street was a focal point of the emerging folk scene. It was here that Paddy and Maureen O'Donoghue offered bowls of soup and pints to struggling young troubadours. Characters such as Luke Kelly, Ronnie Drew and Johnny Moynihan swapped songs and ideas long before they were considered legends. Another one of these young beatniks was Andy Irvine, a London-born musician of Irish and Scottish parentage.
Parents of fame and renown, oh, had I been obedient and kept the command, I never would have broken the laws of the land.
Long before Sweeney's Men or Planxty, this was the place where Andy sang English folk songs over a drone emanating from a broken cistern in the men's toilets. As it turned out, Andy would spend much of his musical career singing along to drones.
You know, my mother was a musical comedy actress, and I had all these old 78s, cracked and whatever, and I used to play them. And I didn't like the music, but I liked something about it, you know. And so I guess I always knew that I was interested in music, but it took the first 15 years to discover what it was. And Woody was as soon as I heard Woody, I remember the moment really well. I bought this record. I had no idea who he was, whether he was famous or whatever. I put this record on, and the turntable was one of those automatic ones, you know, so it clicked, and I sat down and I waited, and the very first beat, I thought, yes, this is it, discovered it at last.
The first incarnation of Sweeney's Men was formed around 1966 with Andy Irvine and his folk buddies Johnny Moynihan and Joe Dolan. Moynihan had introduced them to the Greek bouzouki, and together with Andy they initiated the famous mandolin bouzouki interplay that would later become a strong feature of Planxty's music.
That was kind of invented by Johnny and me one night in his parents' kitchen, which I remember well. He was playing Rattling Roaring Willie, and he was trying to get the phrasing of the tune, and we suddenly decided to put a harmony to it, you know, and I think that was perhaps the beginning of the bouzouki mandolin interplay. I think the thing about Johnny is that he's never changed, you know. We've all evolved, but Johnny decided on his principles a long time ago, and he's never wavered from them since then.
That was part. It was also the accents they sang in, and there was something very real for me about it. They weren't kind of chronicling the music. They were living it, and they had the lifestyle of it, and they were innovative. Johnny Moynihan, very innovative man, you know. They were very exciting.
Trapped in the middle of Ireland's showband era, Sweeney's Men stuck out like a sore thumb, their scruffy demeanour and innovative interpretations of Irish, Scottish and American folk songs.
I was in Sweeney's Men for a year, 2 years, nearly, and by that time I kind of had enough, because we used to play. Oh, we used to play in dance halls. We'd only play for 20 minutes or something in a dance hall, but it was absolute hell, because the show band would never. They'd never change the settings on their amplifier for you. So you had the vocalist's mic, which was kind of volume 11, like, you know, and you had the brass player's mic, which was volume 1. And the other two guys, if I was singing the song, the other two guys would be as close as they could to this big, sure bulkhead mic, you know, going kind of hitting it as hard as they could, and maybe singing harmonies like that. And I'd be holding my instrument up to the hot mic and trying to sing into it, and there were no monitors, so it was echoing around this big concrete space with 1,500 people who weren't listening anyway, you know. I had some dreadful moments. I sang The Old Maid in the Garret, which was our big hit number. I sang it in all 12 keys one night down in County Wexford. You know, and then the terrible thing was there was no back exit from dance halls. You went into the dressing room and you put your things away, and then you took a deep breath and you walked out through the public, you know, hoping they wouldn't see you with a coat on, like, you know.
Joe Dolan left for Israel in 1967 to be replaced by Terry Woods. Andy himself left after one album to wander Eastern Europe in 1968. Andy's trip to the Balkans proved very educational.
Well, the first time I heard Bulgarian music, which was played on the radio a lot in those days, you know, because I mean culture, like the overthrow of Stalinism was a necessity, historical necessity, but it was a shame that all the bathwater was thrown out as well, you know, because culture was much respected in those days. And I heard it on the radio. I was hitchhiking with a woman who became my wife quite briefly, and the driver was trying to talk to us, and we didn't have enough Bulgarian, and the engine was very loud anyway, so he turned on the radio, and this music came out, and I went kind of, oh, that must be Bulgarian folk music, and I was hooked on it. It was like the Woody Guthrie thing earlier on, from the first bar. I was kind of, yes!
It was in the basement of this very house in prosperous County Clár that all four original members of Planxty recorded together for the first time. Christy Moore had returned from England with a plan to assemble the country's finest musicians to record his second solo album, which he subsequently titled Prosperous. Joining Christy was Andy Irvine of Sweeney's Men, renowned Clár piper Liam O'Flynn, and Christy's old school pal Donal Lunny. The chemistry was so good that all four members reconvened in Dublin in January 1972 to form a band called Planxty.
Basically, we were having such a good time that it just dawned on us one day, should we try and put this together on a more permanent basis? Yeah. And everybody was up for it. Yeah. But we had to go on and finish what it was we were doing. So we went away for about 6 months and then reconvened. Liam ceased being a teacher. Donal ceased being a member of We Four. Andy came back from Bulgaria. I came back from Yorkshire. Yeah. And we started rehearsing.
Christy got in touch with myself, Donal Lunny, Andy Irvine. The idea we'd be his sort of special guests on the new album. And gosh, I can't even remember, you know, we didn't sort of spend a huge amount of time rehearsing or anything like that. And there's a house outside, a family outside Prosperous, the Rinn family. And we used to have sessions in the basement of this great, wonderful old house, Rinn's house. And we decided to record the album in the basement, in the house. And we had, you know, went in with our ideas, and it just came together so easily, so comfortably, you know. And you know, the result was, you know, really exciting. You know, a sort of a new feel, a new sound, actually.
Yeah. Probably the most important thing in my entire life was Donovan was touring with an Irish band in Easter 1972, and we knew the people who were promoting it, or Donal did. Donal knew everybody anyway, and we were asked if we'd play support. And the first gig was in the Hangar in Galway, which was a dance hall. And we went on first, and the sound man was Donovan's brother-in-law, and he wasn't very interested in us, and he wasn't even there when we got up to play, you know. But the audience went berserk, and I thought, there's a fight. It's a dance hall fight has started up here, you know. And I turned to the lads, alarmed, and then they were going kind of, and Donald's smile was kind of like this, you know. And I thought, well, it obviously isn't a fight. And it took me a while to realise that we were going down like, you wouldn't believe. It was like the audience discovered that night something which they'd been looking for. Des had to go and ask Donovan it was okay to play an encore. And my recollection of that tour, which was about 6 gigs, was that apart from the Dublin one, we blew him off the stage every night.
What's widely known as the first period of Planxty, between 1972 and 1975, they recorded 3 vibrant albums, titled Planxty, Well Below the Valley, and Cold Blow and the Rainy Night.
You know, the energy that comes from that sort of chemistry, it's all there in the music, and that sort of, you know, excitement. And people who heard, you know, Planxty for the first time, I think that, you know, you instinctively become aware of that. Like the musicians, it's happening for the musicians. An audience really you know, is turned on by that. Yeah. And people were turned on by it. I mean, when we started Planxty, we decided, you know, we'd give it like 3 months, and if nothing was happening, then fair enough. In 3 months, the thing had really taken off, and it was, you know, it was like a runaway train. Like you couldn't get off.
The influence of Planxty is as relevant today as it ever was. From Irish acts such as David Kitt and the Frames, to Manchester's Doves, to Kentucky's Will Oldham and far beyond, their sense of adventure resonates from generation to generation.
As I rode out on a bright May morning to view the meadows and flowers so gay, who should I spy but my own true lover, as she sat under yon willow tree. I took off my hat and I did salute her. The first time I heard Planxty was on my way to, I was going to Paris for the summer to work in an Irish bar, and I was just in Dublin airport, and I kind of wanted to take something, you know, some Irish music. It was kind of my first time living abroad and on my own, and wanted to take some traditional music with me. And so I was in Dublin airport, and I'd heard bits about Planxty, and you know, I mean, as I knew Christy Moore was in Planxty, and you know, I liked some of his songs, and Donal Lunny was in Planxty, and I'd always admired Donal Lunny. You know, even playing with, you know, people that I wouldn't have been that into, like Mary Black, you'd see Donal Lunny in the background on a bouzouki or something and doing something really interesting. So, and my dad was always a big fan of Donal Lunny and Christy Moore, and he'd seen Planxty in the 70s in Rallina. I remember him telling me about that, and I guess I'd heard bits and pieces of the, you know, of legend about them, and so I just bought this cassette, the Planxty collection, and off I went to Paris. And when I got there, you know, what initially was kind of intended as something to kind of combat homesickness became a really important record for me. I was completely shocked, you know, blown away by what I heard. Until the day I die, when misfortune falls, sure no man can shun it. I was a blind fool, I'll ne'er deny. Now at nights when I go to my slumber, it's thoughts of my true love run in my mind. When I turn around to embrace my darling, instead of gold, sure 'tis brass I find. And I wish the Queen would call home her army from the West Indies, America and Spain, and to every man his wedded woman, in hopes that you and I will meet again.
could I ever wanted.
A band that are almost mythical, but most definitely legendary. Interference on Other Voices, Songs from a Room, Tuesday at 9 on Network 2.
Before the end of the first period of Planxty, Donal Lunny had left to form the Bothy Band, being replaced by Andy Irvine's old pal, Johnny Moynihan. Christy Moore was already a high-profile solo artist, and he left to be replaced by Paul Brady. Lunny's ventures with the Bothy Band proved fruitful, as they had their own wild and robust new sound for traditional Irish music.
When Brady came into the band in September '74, for a while we were a five-piece. We were doing this play in Edinburgh, and Christy stayed on to do it. And that was brilliant. I mean, I'd like to have a recording of that, because we did a couple of concerts at the time and they were excellent. But Christy left, and Paul was our engine room. You know, when Donal left the band, Johnny, lovely player, very lyrical player, but not an engine room player. And we started to slide a bit there because we got a bit thin in sound, because I'm not an engine room player either. And yeah. And when Paul joined the band, we got the engine room back. So for a while after that, we were kind of back up. But just the 3.5 years of permanent gigging began to get to us. And everybody, Liam called a meeting over there in Belmont Avenue. We knew what it was going to be. You know, we thought, aha, this is it. And when we were all kind of there, he said, well, I called this meeting because I want to leave the band. And everybody else said, yes, I do too, me. So we all left the band and came over here and got plastered, I'm sure. And by the end of the night, we were probably saying, oh God, it was a great band. Should we really do this? Yeah. But we did. And then Paul, the next day, Paul rang me up and said, Andy, what are we going to do? Yeah. So we became a duo, and as people have said, we made an album in '76, which probably would have been Planxty's fourth album, or part of it.
Our sustenance is taken away, our tithes and taxes for to pay, to support that law-protected church to which they do adhere. And our Irish gentry, well, you know, to other countries they do go. And the money from old Ireland they squander here and there. But if those squires would stay at
I think it's a great album. I love it. It was magical making it, and
to build mills and factories,
you know,
here to employ
we didn't have any notion whatsoever that people would still be talking about it in 2003. I hadn't a clue. It was just us doing the songs that we had been touring for years, and it amazes me ever since how popular it's become. Even, I mean, not even among folk people, but like, you know, all over the world I go, like people come up to me, the strangest people out of the strangest disciplines of music, like punks, and used to come up and say they loved the album. People in the mainstream pop, you know, it just had something. I don't know what it had.
Riders imbuing the cattle, just as they came there, oh, they all laid their money on the Monaghan grey mare.
In 1975, after a meeting around the corner in their manager Des Kelly's office, the members of Planxty adjourned here at Madigan's pub in Donnybrook to drink to the demise of the band. Both Donal and Christy had left at this stage, and Strabane singer Paul Brady and Sweeney's Men legend Johnny Moynihan were both members. But the band were in severe debt and making very little money. Like so many other musical mavericks, Planxty had fallen foul to poor business practice.
Let me to the table.
By the end of their first period, Planxty had already left behind a legacy of music that had taken traditional Irish music to new and exotic places, without ever disgracing the tradition itself. There were, of course, a few detractors who disapproved of musicians such as Liam O'Flynn, joining a band of guitars, bouzouki's and mandolins.
Then she got up and I lay down, saying, lassie, are we able? But Matilda, yeah, fall the diddle da, diary fall the diddle dairy, oh.
I think the only one who might have suffered that a little bit might have been Liam in the early days. And some of the more conservative elements of, say, the piping world and of the traditional music world might have thought it was a bad move for Liam to be playing with guitars and mandolins. But then, once the band recorded and once the band started playing, I mean, people like Seamus Ennis gave the band his blessing. And generally, the few critics, most of them came around. There still would be a few of them there, you know, but so what? I mean, we weren't making music for anybody except ourselves. Yeah. And we were happy with it.
This was a sort of a new direction. You know, traditional musicians were unused to that sort of approach and so on. And as indeed I was myself, but I've always had a terrific musical curiosity, I suppose. But I also knew that the people involved very well and respected their music. And I remember we had actually one rule in the band, that if there was any one individual within the band who decided, you know, who really didn't want to do this, that, or the other, or whatever, that was respected, and there was no further argument about it. And that was to me, that was a terrifically important thing, you know.
Yeah. Ireland in the 60s was still like the 50s everywhere else, you know. So it's almost kind of like the 70s in Ireland in the traditional music world is where people started breaking the mold, and they attracted young people to listening to traditional music. And it was very much they were very much a young people's band. And I suppose, like, whenever that's the case, the parents are always going to be giving out about it, you know. And it's probably a great sign that they were doing something innovative.
I mean, I've always had a fondness for acoustic instruments, and it really was just, you know, what they managed, the level of dynamic they managed to achieve with, you know, just kind of 4 acoustic instruments, you know, and, you know, layered up overdubs and stuff. But you know, they could really rock out with four acoustic instruments on something like the 42-pound check, you know, which I still kind of play quite regularly in DJ sets, and then just beautiful interpretations of you know, songs that I guess were familiar to me, like Legs Upon the Train and Cliffs of Dooneen. And you know, initially I kind of saw similarities to other stuff that I was listening to, like, you know, just the kind of Lego brick kind of layered approach to you know, just carefully layering up tone and textures, and like in stuff like Kraftwerk even, you know. I mean, I really saw kind of similarities to people like Kraftwerk and Stereolab and Yola Tango.
We certainly felt that sense of adventure, and we knew from our audiences they were feeling that sense of adventure, and that's, you know, God, that's so fundamental in any band's success, and when it means something new is happening, something exciting, and that excites people, you know.
My money here's no good if it weren't for the alligators. I'd sleep out in the woods. The song I chose to play is The Lakes Upon the Train, and it's from the album Cold Blow on the Rainy Night. And the reason why I liked it the first time I heard it is because Christy Moore's vocal on it really just, something about it really struck me. And like all Planxty songs, it just sounded really honest. And it's a very nice kind of specific tale about a guy who meets a girl near New Orleans and falls in love with her, but then he can't marry her because she's got a love who's far away.
And would you draw any parallels between the spirit of the music, that you're making nowadays and that they were making in the 60s and 70s?
Well, I mean, the first thing that really struck me about it was just how honest it sounded, and how and I saw a live video of them playing, and just when you see them playing the songs, it just really strikes you that they mean every word. Even though these are folk songs that have been passed down through generations, they're just in the song, like. And I think the music that we would make in the Rednecks or whatever, it would always be about just striving to project the music as well as we can and just come across as like honest. So even though it's a different style of music, I think it could be seen as being quite similar in that way. To the health of my Creole girl by the lakes of Pontchartrain.
My dad and my uncles, my uncle's a big piper, and he's always, you know, used to come over here a lot playing with people like Paddy Keenan and everyone. And just I was about growing up with it really, a lot of that music. So, but when I first heard them, it wasn't like the stuff my grandma played, you know, like, or you know, it just had this. It was like hippies had got hold of Irish music, you know, and they obviously smoked, or maybe they didn't, but it felt, you know, it was about when I really got into about 13, and I just poured over the first 2 albums, Cold Blow and Planxty. It's just like, this is amazing, you know, and just even discovering people like you, Ewan McCall, you know, and everyone via them, I got into like those different things, and you know, they did really blow my head off. It was like I was checking out the Ramones and punk and things like that, but also really getting into them, you know.
But just, I mean, like I said, the Beatles are traditional music. They did it all. They had it all.
Roving in the night, we'll go no more a roving, let the moon shine so bright. We'll go no more a roving. She took the bed in both her hands and she...
Well, I have to say that for the first 18 months of Planxty, the first 2 years of Planxty, was maybe some of the most exciting times, particularly when the band was taking off, because it was like there was a generation of people being turned on to this music that we were playing, and were discovering their roots and their heritage and their Irishness the same way as I did with the Clancy Brothers. It was just a huge turn on, you know, and to be part of that and to be up on stage providing that it was a tremendous buzz.
Yeah.
If I remember correctly, there were no record companies interested, and it was Phil Coulter who became interested, and Phil Coulter recorded the band.
Produced your first 3 albums?
Yeah, and he sold them on. Then he exploited them.
Really?
Yeah.
So there was, I mean, Planxty, as great as you were, you didn't have the business and things stuff in the early days?
No, not at all.
Was that the time? Was that the 70s? Was that the nature of the climate and the...
Well, I think the scene we emerged from didn't have any business acumen in it. It was the folk scene, basically. It was the ballad scene. There weren't business people involved in it. So we didn't have any knowledge of all that. But that said, none of the record companies, be it the independents or the nationals or internationals, were interested initially. It was only when Coulter recorded us that they became interested.
Yeah.
One thing I'd like to make it very clear, I am immensely proud of what I did with Planxty. And I think that at that time it was something very, very special, and continues to be something very, very special. In point of fact, with my hand on my heart, I would say that I have heard nothing since Planxty that gives me the same excitement. I've heard nothing that moves the goalposts the way Planxty did. I've heard nothing that has the same dynamic as Planxty, but nothing that has the same energy, that same originality, that same fusion of things. I was very proud to have been part of it, and I still sign off for that when I look back on my 35 years in the music business. That's one of the things that gives me great pleasure, and I still play the Planxty albums. Now, whatever about the other stuff, that's unfortunate. It's unfortunate. I don't feel that I have in any way acted in bad faith with Planxty. I still have a huge respect for all of the guys and for their music. And I wouldn't want to be perceived as somebody who exploited that situation, who didn't care about it, or who was cavalier about it. I was none of those things, and it's still very important to me.
The first 3 albums are owned by Shanachie Records, and they put them out in a really scrubby way with the wrong, you know, pictures that were taken later on earlier albums. I hate that. And misprints, you know, the west coast of Clár, Claire.
Well, basically there's things going on now with Planxty material that really pisses me off. You know, anybody who wants to seems to be able to get hold of those old Planxty tracks and put them out on any fucking old crap compilation they want to, you know, and that pisses me off. You know, I don't like that.
Yeah.
I don't like arseholes having total access to my work.
Yeah.
You know, so certainly that was one lesson that I would have learned.
And you're not in control of this music?
None whatsoever. I've no say.
Who owns it?
Phil Coulter sold it to some crowd in America called Shanachie, whom I don't know.
Yeah. A record label in the States. And ideally you'd love to, I mean, the original members to own their own music and be able to put these, it'd be nice to put these albums out again. And
well, what I would love to do would be to re-record all the 6 albums. That's what I'd like to do.
Yeah.
Just do them again.
Yeah.
But I don't get me wrong, I'm not kind of, whereas I might display a little bit of anger when you talk to me about it, I don't lie awake at night with burning resentment or anything, you know.
Sure.
I've better things to be doing, but it's a pity.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, the important thing is that the music is made and it's there.
Yeah.
It's your music. And people can hear that.
Yeah, I'm glad that people have access to it, but, you know, they do real tardy things, like the way they reproduce the sleeves.
Yeah.
And they don't put in the sleeve notes, and they're just trying to cut corners all the time. And as for where the money goes, that's another one. But again, I'm not lying awake over it.
Yeah, yeah.
But I suppose if I had the chance to do it all again, the music would stay the same.
Yeah.
But other bits and pieces might be a bit different. Yeah.
But in terms of the control, and in terms of the fact that Shanachie now own the product, in the early 90s, we were restructuring. I had split with my ex-partner, Bill Martin. We were restructuring the company. And in fact, the masters were offered to Christy. It was a situation where it was one of the assets of the company. Shanachie had been asking about acquiring the masters. We offered it to Christy. We couldn't strike a deal because, well, what was offered by the record label was assessed by them, and indeed on the basis of royalties, etc., and potential. We couldn't come to a deal, but the offer was there, and it was maybe a year or so later when the Shanachie deal was signed off on. Shanachie then got the control of the albums.
You know, I was always the treasurer of Planxty until Paul Brady came into it, and I'm the person who writes to Shanachie and says, "Listen, you owe us money," you know, and it's like trying to draw teeth, you know. But I persist. I get angry. I get furious too. I get furious with record companies because they just don't, you know, you have to ask them for the money, always. They never send you a check, as they should, twice a year, or rarely, not in my experience.
The reality of the record industry is such that, again, when we go back to the early days of Planxty, trying to get the albums released in the United States, I can tell you there wasn't a queue up of major labels looking for Planxty. And the one label who got it, the one label who appreciated Planxty, one label who were themselves very keen on the whole acoustic world and world music. They were a couple of guys who had signed the likes of the Chieftains, Ladysmith Black Mambazo. These were guys who were doing things in music that no other American record label were doing, and they were very keen on Planxty. So we were glad to get a deal, but albeit a small and an independent label. Now, no label is perfect. They certainly made mistakes, and I wasn't thrilled with some of the artwork and things, etc. But you know, that's a chance that you take, and to have every artist, every producer, every songwriter would love to have ultimate control over his product. That's a luxury that very few of us actually ever have.
In late 1978, all 4 original members of Planxty reformed the group. Donal Lunny left the Bothy Band and brought with him the great flute player Matt Malloy, who later went on to play with the Chieftains. The second period of Planxty began with the album After the Break, recorded here at the famous Windmill Lane Studios in Dublin.
Here's the health to the reams of married life, the soap, the suds and blue. Hearts through love and hate and starched in the washing soda too.
The first 3 albums have a lot of youthful energy about them, the novelty, etc. But for me, and I know I'm in a minority here, I prefer the second 3 albums because I think musically they're more intricate, We had evolved musically quite a long way by that time, and I just prefer the music. I think it's more interesting to listen to. But when I think of the times we had, I think 1972 1972 through to the end of 74 was magic. 74 till Brady joined the band was kind of a struggle, and then it was great for a while with Brady until we were just too tired to continue. Yeah. And 79 onwards, it was okay. I don't remember it as being I could be wrong, but I don't remember it as being it was certainly not 1972. Yeah. The music was better, but more was expected of us at that point. You know? I think it was more responsibility to do well, and when we didn't get the reaction we wanted, there was a kind of slight feeling of, with me anyway, of paranoia. You know?
The second period of Planxty stretched from the Reformation in late 1978 to their final demise in 1983. Over this period, a further 3 albums were made. After the break, The Woman I Love So Well and Words and Music. Although the music was dazzling, the spirit of being in the band wasn't quite there. It was always going to be impossible for Planxty to recreate the past. Records and live appearances became more sporadic. The Woman I Love So Well came out in 1980 and featured the additions of Noel Hill on concertina, Tony Lennon on fiddle, and Bill Whelan on Fender Rhodes. Their final release was Words and Music in 1983. Christy and Donal moved on to Moving Hearts, and Liam and Andy kept the Planxty name with a variety of lineups, performing live but never recording again.
Lie still, me little Musgrave, and hug me from the cold.
When I think of Planxty, or when you mention Planxty to me, it would be the early time that would always spring to mind. It was different. You know, I suppose we were a bit more road weary at this stage. Yeah. We'd been around the block a few times. Yeah. And I mean, I know it's 20 years ago, but we'd still been around the block a few times even then. So it didn't have the freshness or the vitality. And the tours were very, very arduous. Yeah. I remember that particular 1978-79 time, we did some crazy touring. Yeah. But the 2 hours every night was always pretty good, but the other 22 could have been difficult enough.
The original members of Planxty did squeeze in one more memorable performance at the 1981 Eurovision Song Contest. While Europe was celebrating the genius of Buck's Fizz, Planxty were quietly, elegantly supplying the interval performance with a unique piece of music by Bill Whelan called Time Dance. 14 years later, Whelan was back at the Eurovision with another piece of music spawned from Time Dance and called River Dance.
I'd like to remix those 3 albums, and I'd like to get paid for them. You know, so I mean, we did have the idea of re-recording them. But I don't think we could manage to do that because we're not the same musicians who recorded them in 1972. But it would be fun. It would be, well, there's that as well. But to re-record the old material, knowing exactly what the parameters were, I'd find that really interesting. You know, you might remember things from those 72 recording sessions by playing the same thing that you've long since forgotten. But then, actually, maybe it's not a good idea.
With or without the constant speculation of another Planxty reformation some 20 years later, all 4 original members are still playing music around the world. However, no one is ruling out the possibility that they will perform together again in the not-so-distant future.
There's nobody longs for it more than myself and the other 3 guys. Yeah. But who knows? Yeah. Definitely, the time is right.
Yeah, definitely.
Let's go for it.
Well, we've something a little bit different this time anyway. This next song is a sea shanty. And where I come from, they don't have many sea shanties. As the nearest thing they have in Kildare to sea shanties is horse boxes. And Timony vans and stuff like that. But this is a sea shanty I first heard about 14 or 15 years ago when I first came to Dublin, when my life took a big change and I came to the capital and heard people singing sea shanties in Capel Street, which I thought was odd. But anyway, this is a sea shanty called Sally Brown, sung by Andy Irvine, late of Sweeney's Men, Planxty and Paul Brady. Started off there.
I shipped on board of the Liverpool liner, way, hey, roll and go. And we rolled all night and we rolled till the day. Going to spend my money along with Sally Brown. I shipped on board of the Liverpool liner, way, hey, roll and go. And we rolled all night and we rolled till the day, to spend my money along with Sally Brown.